You didn't start watching this because everything is fine. Somewhere, quietly, you sensed that the way you experience life might not be the whole story. Maybe you call it awakening. Maybe it feels like clarity or restlessness or a strange pull you can't explain. But what if that pull isn't you waking up at all? What if the one who thinks they are awakening is part of the dream? Right now, thoughts are appearing on their own. Sensations are unfolding without effort. You didn't choose the next breath, yet it arrives. So ask yourself gently, who is actually conscious here? Is it you trying to wake up inside the experience? Or is consciousness itself already awake, quietly perceiving you, the way a dream perceives its characters before they ever question reality? Most of the confusion around consciousness begins with a very small, almost invisible assumption. You probably carry it without noticing. It hides inside common language. You say, my consciousness, my awareness, my mind waking up. The words suggest ownership, as if consciousness were something you picked up along the way, like a skill, a tool, or a personal upgrade. As if you came first and consciousness arrived later to serve you. But pause for a moment and look more carefully, not philosophically, not spiritually, just honestly. Before any thought appears, before any memory shows up, before you name yourself, something is already present. There is already a field in which all of that happens. Thoughts move through it, sensations flicker inside it, emotions rise and fall there, and yet you were taught to believe that you are the owner of this field, rather than one of the many movements appearing inside it. This is not a harmless misunderstanding. It shapes how you search, how you suffer, and how you try to wake up. When you believe you possess consciousness, you naturally try to use it. You try to improve it, sharpen it, control it. You meditate to enter awareness. You observe your thoughts as if you are standing outside them. You imagine consciousness as a spotlight that you can aim better with practice. But all of this effort quietly assumes the same thing, that there is a central me holding the flashlight, and that me feels very convincing. It has a name, a history, preferences, fears. It remembers childhood and anticipates the future. It feels like the one who is aware. But if you slow down enough, something strange becomes visible. That sense of me is itself something you notice. It shows up as a feeling, a narrative, a tension in the body, a familiar voice in the head. And anything that can be noticed is already appearing within awareness, not standing outside of it. This is where the confusion tightens. The mind immediately tries to flip the problem into a concept. It says, so consciousness is bigger than me, or me I am part of consciousness, or the consciousness is universal. These ideas may sound elevated, but they still keep the same structure intact. There is still a me trying to understand something larger. The ownership just gets more abstract. But what if the ownership was never real? What if consciousness was never something you had, but something that was happening as you? Think of it this way. A wave does not possess the ocean. It does not borrow water for a while and then give it back. The wave is a temporary shape the ocean takes. In the same way, what you call yourself may be a temporary pattern that consciousness is forming, experiencing, and dissolving without ever stopping being itself. This idea can feel unsettling at first. If consciousness is not yours, then what are you? The mind reacts quickly here. It looks for ground. It wants a role, a center, a controller. It fears disappearing. But notice, that fear too is something being perceived. It arises, vibrates, and fades within the same silent space. The belief that you possess consciousness creates a subtle tension. It makes you feel responsible for maintaining awareness, as if you could lose it, damage it, or fail at it. It turns awakening into a task, and tasks always belong to someone. So the ego stays employed, endlessly refining itself, polishing itself, trying to become more conscious. Yet consciousness itself never improves. It does not evolve. It does not get clearer with effort. It does not become more present, it simply is. It was present during your first memory. It is present now. It will be present when this thought finishes. The only thing that changes is what appears within it. This is why so many people feel stuck despite years of seeking. They are trying to adjust the contents of experience, while missing the nature of the space that contains them. They are rearranging furniture, believing the room will finally reveal itself once everything is in the right place. But the room was never hidden. The moment you stop assuming that consciousness belongs to you, something softens. The search loosens its grip. You may notice that awareness does not need your effort to exist. It does not wait for your permission. It was already here before you tried to find it. And once that assumption weakens, another one begins to tremble as well. The idea that your identity is built from the thoughts, memories, and emotions you keep pointing to as me. Most of what you call yourself is built out of thought. Not in a poetic way, in a very literal moment-by-moment way. A thought appears, then another thought comments on it, then a memory joins in, then an emotion follows, and suddenly there is a solid sense of me sitting in the center of experience. It feels continuous, personal, and real. But if you slow down enough, you can see the stitching. Identity feels stable only because thoughts repeat. You think the same kinds of thoughts every day, about your past, about your roles, about what you like and dislike, about what you believe you are capable of. Over time, these thoughts begin to sound like a single voice. That voice claims ownership. It says, "This is who I am," and because it speaks so often, you rarely question it. But notice something simple. Thoughts come and go. You cannot predict the next one with certainty. You do not choose most of them. A memory appears without permission. An image flashes. A sentence forms in your head, fully shaped, before you even realize it's there. And yet somehow you take all of this movement and call it me. Imagine if you treated sounds the same way. A car passes, a bird sings, a door closes. You don't say, "That noise is who I am." You hear it, and it disappears. Thoughts are not different in nature. They appear, vibrate, and dissolve. The only difference is that you learn to identify with them. This identification is so deep that it feels invisible. You don't say, "I am thinking a thought." You say, "I think." You don't say, "A feeling of fear is present." You say, "I am afraid." Language quietly fuses awareness with content. Over time, the fusion feels like a person living inside the head, steering life from behind the eyes. But if thoughts truly were your identity, then who are you in the gaps? There are moments, even brief ones, when thinking pauses. You might be looking at the sky, listening to music, washing your hands. For a few seconds, there is no inner commentary, no story about who you are. Yet you do not disappear. You are still here. Experience continues. Perception remains clear. Something is present, even when identity is not being narrated. This is uncomfortable for the mind to admit. The mind wants continuity. It wants a center. It wants to be the author of experience. So it quickly fills the silence with interpretation. That was peaceful. That was boring. I liked that. And just like that, the character returns. The story resumes. Identity feels solid again. But solidity does not mean truth. It means repetition. What you call your personality is often just a familiar pattern of thoughts reacting to familiar situations. The same triggers produce the same internal dialogue. The same emotions follow. And because the pattern repeats, you assume there must be someone permanent behind it. But a whirlpool looks stable too, until you notice it is made entirely of moving water. The illusion of identity is not that thoughts exist. Thoughts are not the problem. The illusion is believing that thoughts are a mirror of something fixed, rather than movements appearing in awareness. This belief shapes suffering in a quiet way. When a painful thought appears, it feels personal. When a critical thought arises, it feels like a judgment about who you are. When a fearful thought shows up, it feels like a warning from reality itself. You don't experience thoughts as weather. You experience them as facts, and so you spend your life managing a narrative. You try to improve it, heal it, protect it, defend it. You want better thoughts, more positive thoughts, more spiritual thoughts. But all of that effort still assumes that the voice in your head is the center of you. It keeps attention locked inside the storyline, rather than noticing the space in which the story unfolds. Here is the quiet contradiction. You are aware of your thoughts, but your thoughts are not aware of you. A thought does not know it exists. It does not observe anything. It simply appears, and disappears. Awareness, on the other hand, knows the thought. It knows when the thought arrives, it knows its tone, it knows when it fades. That knowing does not require language. It does not announce itself. It is simply present. Yet the habit of identity keeps pulling attention back into the content. It whispers, "This thought matters. This one defines you. This one explains everything." And because the habit is old, it feels like truth. But the more closely you look, the harder it becomes to find an actual self inside the thoughts. There are ideas about yourself, images, labels, roles. None of them stay. None of them are always present. None of them survive silence. And this raises a subtle, unsettling question. If identity is made of thoughts, what happens when thoughts are not leading? What remains when the mind stops describing itself? Most people never stay with that question. They rush to answer it conceptually. They turn it into a belief. But the answer is not a thought. It is something you notice when thought loosens its grip. And noticing it requires looking from a different place, not from the voice in the head, but from the quiet awareness that has been there the entire time, even while the voice was speaking. The mistake is very subtle, which is why almost everyone makes it. It hides inside sincerity, inside effort, inside the honest desire to know what is real. You want to perceive consciousness directly, so you turn inward. You pay attention. You watch your breath, your sensations, your thoughts, and without noticing, you place consciousness in front of you, as if it was something to be found, something to be located, something to be experienced. This is where perception quietly turns against itself. From the very beginning, the search is aimed in the wrong direction, not morally wrong, structurally wrong. Like trying to see your own eyes by staring harder. You assume that consciousness is an object somewhere in experience, and that with enough sensitivity or clarity, you will finally encounter it. But consciousness is not something that appears in experience. It is what experience appears within. When you try to perceive consciousness, you automatically create a distance. There is a you here and a thing called consciousness over there. Even if that thing feels spacious, peaceful, or vast, it is still being treated as an experience. And whatever can be experienced is not consciousness itself, but content arising inside it. This is why so many people say, "I felt consciousness," or "I touched awareness," or "I entered presence." What they actually touched was a state, a shift in sensation, a quieter mind, a more open feeling. These states can be beautiful, they can be meaningful, but they come and go. And anything that comes and goes cannot be what is truly perceiving. The mistake continues because the mind loves experiences. If something feels different, it feels successful. If it feels peaceful, it feels true. So the search becomes refined. You learn to recognize subtle states. You try to return to them. You measure your progress by how often you feel aware. But all of this activity keeps attention focused on what appears, not on what is always already present. There is another layer to the mistake that is even harder to see. When you look for consciousness, you are still assuming that you are the one doing the looking, that there is a perceiver separate from what is perceived. This assumption is rarely questioned because it feels obvious. Of course I am here looking, of course consciousness is something I am trying to notice. But slow down and examine that feeling of being the one who looks. Where is it exactly? Is it a sensation in the body, a tension behind the eyes, a voice that says, "I am aware"? When you try to find it, you only find more appearances, more sensations, more thoughts, more feelings. The one who is looking turns out to be just another idea arising in the same open space. The search keeps missing its own ground. It's like standing on a stage and trying to see the stage by scanning the props. No matter how carefully you examine the objects, you never notice the platform holding everything, because you are already standing on it. Consciousness is like that. It does not announce itself. It does not contrast with anything. It does not feel like an experience because it is the condition that allows experience to be felt at all. This is why effort often backfires. The harder you try to perceive consciousness, the more attention tightens, the more the mind strains, the more subtle control sneaks in. You try to hold awareness, stabilize it, deepen it, but control always belongs to the same identity that believes it is separate. So the effort reinforces the very structure that keeps consciousness seeming distant. Nothing dramatic happens here. No failure, just quiet frustration. You might notice that something feels close but unreachable. That clarity slips away when you try to grasp it. That presence feels natural for a moment, then disappears when you think about it. This can lead to doubt, or to more effort, or to the belief that you are doing something wrong. But the issue is not your ability. It is the orientation of attention. Consciousness cannot be perceived the way you perceive a sensation or a thought, because it is what perceives sensations and thoughts. The moment you turn it into an object, you have already stepped away from it. And the mind is very good at turning everything into an object, including silence, stillness, and emptiness. Here is the quiet shift that rarely gets named. Instead of asking, "How can I perceive consciousness?" notice what is already noticing the question, not intellectually, gently, without trying to answer. The noticing does not require effort. It does not improve with technique. It is already happening, even while you read these words. But the mind immediately wants to claim that noticing. It wants to say, "I'm doing this now." And in that moment, the old structure returns. A seeker appears. A path forms. Time enters. Progress is imagined. This is where the mistake becomes a pattern, not just a moment. Because once consciousness is treated as something to be reached, an entire culture can grow around the reaching. Methods, practices, levels, identities built around being more awake than before. The search becomes refined, respectable, even spiritual. And without realizing it, the effort to wake up becomes another role the mind plays, another identity formed out of thought, another way of staying safely inside the familiar structure of seeking rather than stepping out of it. The modern idea of spiritual awakening looks very different from what it once meant. It speaks the language of growth, achievement, and improvement. It promises clarity, peace, and expansion, often framed as something you can reach if you follow the right path. Read the right books, practice the right techniques, think the right way. Over time, awakening becomes another goal to pursue, another version of success to aim for. And this is where the trap quietly closes. The moment awakening is treated as something you achieve, it automatically belongs to the same structure as everything else you have tried to achieve in life. There is a you here, incomplete, and a future version of you over there, more conscious, more evolved, more free. Time enters the picture, comparison enters the picture, effort becomes central, and without noticing, the same identity that felt limited before is now dressed in spiritual language. The ego doesn't disappear in this process. It adapts. It learns new words. It speaks of presence, vibration, alignment, higher self. It builds an image of itself as someone who is waking up, someone who understands deeper truths, someone who is no longer asleep like others. This can feel empowering at first. It can even bring moments of insight. But it also creates a subtle separation between who you are now and who you believe you must become. And separation is the very thing awakening is supposed to dissolve. In this modern framing, awakening is often presented as a peak experience. A moment you arrive at, a shift that finally makes you different from before. So people chase experiences. They look for breakthroughs, openings, altered states. They wait for something dramatic to happen that will confirm they are there. When it doesn't happen, they assume they are failing. When it does happen briefly, they try to repeat it. But what comes and goes cannot be the truth of what you are. Experiences rise and fall. Insights appear and fade. States of peace alternate with states of confusion. If awakening depended on maintaining a particular experience, it would be fragile. It would belong to conditions. And anything dependent on conditions cannot be what is most fundamental. Another layer of the trap is comparison. Modern spiritual culture quietly encourages measuring. How aware am I compared to before? How present compared to others? How advanced is my understanding? Even when this comparison is subtle, it keeps attention locked on the storyline of progress. It reinforces the idea that there is a personal journey moving forward through stages, collecting insights like badges. But notice what this does. It keeps the sense of me firmly in place. The same me that was anxious, seeking, and incomplete is now spiritual, seeking, and incomplete. Only the costume has changed. There is also pressure hidden in this culture. Pressure to be calm. Pressure to be loving. Pressure to respond consciously. Pressure to transcend emotions rather than feel them. When anger, fear, or doubt appear, they are seen as signs of regression, as if awakening meant becoming something other than human. So people begin to manage their inner life, not out of honesty, but out of image. They try to appear awake, even to themselves. This creates a quiet split. On the surface, there is the identity of the awakened seeker. Underneath, there are still thoughts, reactions, and emotions that don't fit the image. Instead of being seen clearly, they are judged, suppressed, or reframed. And what is suppressed does not dissolve. It waits. It shapes behavior from the shadows. The deepest irony is this: the search for awakening often pulls attention away from what is already true. Awareness is present in confusion just as much as in clarity. Consciousness does not disappear when you feel lost. It does not withdraw when you doubt. It is there during anxiety, boredom, irritation, and fatigue. But the modern narrative teaches you to value certain states over others, so you stop recognizing awareness unless it feels peaceful or expansive. You begin to associate truth with a particular mood, and because moods change, truth feels unstable. The trap is not that people seek. Seeking is natural. The trap is believing that what you are looking for exists in a future version of yourself, that it depends on improvement, that it will arrive once the mind is finally quiet, the ego finally softened, the emotions finally resolved. That belief keeps attention oriented forward instead of noticing what is already functioning effortlessly. There is nothing wrong with practices, teachings, or guidance. The problem begins when they become identities, when awakening becomes something you do, rather than something that gently reveals itself when the doing relaxes. And as long as awakening is treated as an achievement, the mind remains at the center of the story, interpreting, measuring, striving, correcting, which quietly avoids a much more destabilizing realization that what you truly are may not be located in the mind at all. For most of your life, you were taught to look for yourself in the mind. That is where your name lives, your memories, your opinions, your plans. When someone asks who you are, the answer usually comes from this place. You point to your story, your personality, your inner voice. It feels natural to assume that this is where you reside. But the mind is not a place where a self lives. It is a place where things happen. Thoughts appear there. Images, judgments, worries, narratives about the past and future. All of this activity gives the impression of an inner center, a kind of command room behind the eyes. Yet when you slow down and look carefully, you never actually find a thinker behind the thoughts. You only find thoughts happening. The mind feels intimate because it speaks in the first person. I need to figure this out. I should have done better. I am not there yet. The language creates closeness. It makes the thoughts feel personal. But closeness is not identity. A radio can play your favorite song, but it is not the singer. The mind broadcasts content, but it is not who you are. If your true self were inside your mind, it would disappear when the mind quiets. And yet there are moments when thinking slows or stops, and you remain fully present, awake, aware, alive. No confusion, no loss of existence. In fact, those moments often feel more real than the ones filled with commentary. This creates a quiet contradiction. The mind is always changing. Thoughts shift from minute to minute. Moods fluctuate. Beliefs evolve. What you were certain of years ago may no longer make sense. Even your sense of identity changes across time. Child, student, partner, professional, seeker. If the self were inside the mind, it would be as unstable as these movements. But something in you does not age the way thoughts do. You can remember being a child, not just as an image, but as a sense of presence. There was a knowing then, a simple awareness of being here. That same knowing is here now, reading these words. The body is older, the mind is fuller, but the basic sense of being has not changed. The mind cannot explain this. It tries to claim continuity by telling a story. I am the same person because I remember. But memory is content. It appears now, in this moment, as an image or a feeling. The awareness that knows the memory is not contained in it. Awareness does not need memory to exist. This is where many people feel disoriented. If you are not your thoughts, not your memories, not your inner voice, then where are you? The mind wants a location, a reference point, something it can picture. But the true self is not something you can point to without turning it into an object. The moment you say, "It is here," you are already describing something perceived. The true self is not inside the mind because the mind is something you are aware of. You notice thoughts starting. You notice them ending. You notice when the mind is busy and when it is quiet. That noticing does not belong to the mind. It does not have a voice. It does not argue. It does not explain itself. It simply knows. This knowing is so close that it is overlooked. It does not feel special. It does not feel elevated. It feels ordinary, which is why the mind keeps searching for something else, something more dramatic, something that feels like an answer. But answers belong to questions, and questions belong to the mind. What you are is present before any question appears. The mind often resists this recognition because it cannot control it. The mind can manage thoughts. It can refine beliefs. It can practice techniques, but it cannot grasp what is prior to it. So it tries to reinterpret the truth in mental terms. It says, "I understand this now." And immediately, the understanding becomes another thought, another possession, another identity. I am someone who knows this. But knowing is not the same as being. The more closely you look, the more the mind is revealed as an instrument rather than a home. Useful, creative, sometimes exhausting. It helps you navigate the world. It stores information. It imagines possibilities. But it does not contain your existence. It floats inside something larger. And that larger context is not distant. It is not hidden. It is not waiting at the end of a path. It is what allows the mind to be noticed at all. When this begins to register even faintly, the sense of being a thinker inside a head starts to loosen. You may notice that experience feels more open, less personal. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer define the whole of you. They feel more like weather passing through a wide sky. And in that openness, another assumption quietly starts to weaken. The idea that you are a separate individual having experience rather than an experience happening within something vast, impersonal and strangely intimate at the same time. There is a common phrase people use when life feels strange or unreal. They say, "It feels like I'm dreaming." Usually they mean they feel disconnected, overwhelmed, or disoriented. And the assumption underneath that phrase is always the same: I am here, awake, and the world feels dreamlike. But what if that assumption is reversed? What if you are not the one having a dreamlike experience, but the experience itself is what you are? Not a dream happening to someone, but a dream happening as someone. When you dream at night, everything feels real while it lasts. There is a body, a world, other people, emotions, urgency. Inside the dream, the character never doubts their reality. They don't think, "I am a projection of a mind." They think, "This is happening to me." Only when you wake up do you realize that the entire world, including the character you thought you were, appeared inside something larger. Now notice what makes that realization possible. You don't wake up inside the dream. You wake up from it. You discover that the dream was being perceived by something that was never inside it. This is where the metaphor stops being metaphorical. In your waking life, you assume you are the one who is conscious of the world. You feel like a center located somewhere in the body, looking out at reality. But just like in a dream, that sense of being a center may itself be part of what is being perceived, a role being played, a character being experienced. You feel solid because the experience is continuous. There is always a body sensation, always a stream of thoughts, always a sense of location. These elements give the impression of a stable someone moving through time, but continuity does not equal independence. A movie is continuous too, frame after frame, yet it exists entirely as an appearance on a screen. And the screen is never affected by the story. When fear appears, it feels personal. When joy appears, it feels personal. When loss happens, it feels like it happens to you. But in a dream, fear also feels personal. Joy too. Loss too. The difference is not the intensity of experience. The difference is whether the character knows it is a character. Right now, you feel like the dreamer. You feel like the one standing outside experience, evaluating it, navigating it, trying to understand it. But look carefully. Everything you know about yourself appears in the same place as everything else you experience. Thoughts about who you are, feelings of being located, the sense of being here. All of it arises together in the same open field. Nothing stands outside that field. This is the part that the mind resists. Because if you are the dream rather than the dreamer, then control changes meaning. It doesn't disappear, but it is no longer central. The character in a dream doesn't control the dream, yet actions still happen, decisions still occur, movement continues, life doesn't freeze. It simply reveals itself as a happening rather than a personal project. This can feel unsettling because identity is built around authorship. I am doing this. I chose that. I am responsible for my path. These statements feel necessary, and on a practical level they work, but they may not describe what is ultimately happening. They may describe the story the dream tells itself from the inside. In a dream, the character also feels responsible. They decide to run or stay. They speak or stay silent. And yet, from the waking perspective, the entire sequence unfolded without the character actually being in control. The sense of choice was part of the dream's texture. This does not mean life is meaningless or mechanical. It means it is intimate in a different way. When you stop assuming you are the one having experience and begin to sense that you are the experience being known, something softens. The struggle to position yourself correctly relaxes. The need to constantly interpret who you are and where you stand loses urgency. Experience keeps happening, but it happens more freely. Thoughts still appear, but they don't feel like commands. Emotions still rise, but they don't feel like definitions. The body still moves, but it no longer feels like a container for a separate self. It feels more like a pattern in motion, part of a larger unfolding. This is why the phrase, "you are the dream," is so destabilizing. It removes the final reference point the mind clings to. There is no hidden observer inside the body pulling the strings. There is just observing happening in the form of a life. And yet, something remains unmistakably present. Just as when you wake from a dream, there is a clear knowing that was never confused, even while the dream was convincing. That knowing did not have a name in the dream. It did not have a form. It was simply the capacity to know. As this recognition deepens, another question naturally arises, not as a thought but as a quiet curiosity. If this knowing is what perceives the entire dream of me, does it have an identity at all? Or has it been present long before any name, any story, any sense of being someone appeared? Consciousness has no name, no shape, no edges you can point to. It cannot be located in the body, measured by thought, or captured by description. And yet, it knows you completely. Not the version of you you present to the world, but the raw, unedited experience of being you moment by moment. You were given a name very early. That name became a handle the world used to point at you. Over time, you learned to answer to it, to defend it, to associate it with a story. But consciousness never received a name. It never needed one. Names belong to things that can be separated from other things. Consciousness cannot be separated from anything that appears, because everything appears within it. You can say your name silently right now and notice something simple. The sound of the name appears. An image or feeling might follow. But the awareness that knows the name does not change. It does not react. It does not become more itself when named. The name floats inside it like a label placed on water. Forms behave the same way. Your body has a form. Your thoughts have a kind of form. Even emotions carry a texture, a weight, a movement. But consciousness has no texture. It does not feel heavy or light. It does not sit still or move. It does not begin or end. It is not in front of you or behind you. It is not even inside you, because inside and outside only make sense once form exists, and yet nothing about you is hidden from it. Every thought you have ever had appeared there. Every fear, every hope, every memory. Even the thoughts you tried to avoid or deny were fully known as they arose. Consciousness did not judge them. It did not argue with them. It did not try to correct them. It simply knew them by being present as they happened. This is deeply intimate, but not personal. Consciousness does not know you the way another person knows you. It does not build an image. It does not remember you as a story. It knows you the way light knows a room, by illuminating whatever is there without preference. It knows you crying as clearly as it knows you laughing. It knows confusion as clearly as it knows clarity, and it does this without effort. The mind struggles to understand this because it equates knowing with thinking. For the mind, to know something is to define it, describe it, place it in context. Consciousness knows without doing any of that. It knows before language, before interpretation, before identity. This is why it feels so easy to miss. You are always looking for something recognizable, something that feels like an answer, something you can say, "This is it." But consciousness does not present itself that way. It does not step forward as an object of attention. It stays where it has always been, allowing attention to move freely within it. When people say they want to experience consciousness, they often mean they want to experience something new, something distinct, something that stands out from ordinary life. But consciousness is not new. It has been present in every ordinary moment you have ever lived. It was there during boredom, during waiting, during distraction, during doubt. It was there even when you forgot about it. And because it has no form, the mind keeps trying to give it one. Vastness, stillness, emptiness, light. These words can point in a direction, but they are still forms. They are still experiences. Consciousness itself is not vast or small. Those are comparisons. It is not empty or full. Those are descriptions of content. Consciousness is simply the knowing of whatever is. This knowing does not belong to you, and that sentence can feel unsettling, because if it does not belong to you, then what is your role? Where do you fit? But notice something important. Even the feeling of being unsettled is known. Even the question, "What about me?" appears inside the same unchanging field. You do not need to make consciousness care about you. It already does in the only way it can, by knowing you completely without interruption. You cannot fall out of it. You cannot lose it. You cannot damage it. You cannot become unworthy of it. These ideas only make sense when identity is central. Consciousness has no identity to defend, and this is where a subtle tension often arises. Once you sense that consciousness is impersonal, vast and unmoving, the mind tries to relate to it. It wants to align with it, merge with it. Use it as a reference point. It wants to behave correctly in its presence, to do the right things, to stay close to it, and without noticing, a new form of effort begins. You start monitoring your experience, trying to stay aware, trying not to fall back into unconsciousness, trying to live from the right place. Control quietly re-enters, disguised as sincerity, and the same mind that could never grasp consciousness now tries to manage its expression. This is where the relationship between consciousness and control becomes delicate, because the very attempt to hold on to what is formless can pull attention back into the structure that believes it must hold something at all. Trying to control consciousness usually begins with good intentions. You want clarity, stability, freedom from unnecessary suffering. So you learn to watch your thoughts, regulate your emotions, stay present. At first, this can feel helpful. There is a sense of agency, a feeling that you are finally taking responsibility for your inner life. But slowly, almost without noticing, control becomes a new center. You begin to monitor yourself. Am I aware enough right now? Am I reacting unconsciously? Did I lose presence just now? Attention turns into surveillance. Instead of simply experiencing, you start managing experience. And the mind, which thrives on management, steps back into authority wearing a spiritual mask. The danger is not that control exists. Some level of regulation is natural in daily life. The danger is believing that consciousness itself needs to be controlled, stabilized, or directed. That belief subtly assumes that awareness is fragile, that it can be lost, damaged, or improved through effort. But consciousness is not unstable. What is unstable are the contents appearing within it. Thoughts change, emotions surge and settle, sensations rise and fall. When you try to control consciousness, what you are actually trying to control is experience. And experience resists control by nature. It moves, it shifts, it responds to countless conditions you cannot fully predict. So the effort tightens, you try harder to stay centered, you correct yourself more quickly, you suppress reactions that feel unconscious, you aim for a consistent state of calm or clarity. And when you inevitably fall short, frustration appears, guilt sometimes, doubt. The quiet belief that you are not doing this right. Notice what has happened. Awareness, which was effortless, has turned into a performance. Something you do well or poorly, something you maintain, something you can lose. And the moment awareness becomes a task, it stops feeling natural. It becomes tense, narrow, slightly strained. This tension is often mistaken for depth. People say they are being very conscious because they feel effort, but effort is a sign of control, not clarity. True awareness does not feel tight. It does not need to hold itself in place. It does not require constant correction. It is already present before you try to manage it. Another subtle danger appears here. When you try to control the conscious experience, you begin to divide experience into acceptable and unacceptable parts. Presence becomes good. Distraction becomes bad. Peace becomes progress. Restlessness becomes failure. Instead of meeting what arises, you evaluate it. Instead of seeing clearly, you interfere. This creates inner conflict. An emotion appears, and immediately there is a second movement that wants it gone. A thought arises, and there is tension around having it. The body reacts, and the mind tries to override it with awareness. On the surface, this looks like practice. Underneath, it is resistance, and resistance always reinforces separation. You begin to feel like there is a higher version of you who should be in charge, keeping the lower parts in line. The ego splits into manager and managed. One watches, one is watched, one judges, one is judged. This internal hierarchy keeps the sense of a controller alive. But consciousness has no hierarchy. It does not prefer one experience over another. It does not need to eliminate anything to remain itself. When anger appears, awareness is not damaged. When confusion appears, awareness does not dim. When you forget everything you have ever learned, awareness does not disappear. Only the story about awareness disappears. The attempt to control also delays a deeper trust. As long as you believe you must steer consciousness, you cannot relax into it. You remain vigilant, you stay slightly on edge. You are always one step away from correcting something. This prevents the kind of openness where insight happens on its own. Paradoxically, the more you try to control, the more you feel out of control. Life does not slow down. Thoughts do not obey. Emotions do not consult your plans. So you either tighten further or you feel defeated. Both options keep attention locked in effort. There is another fear beneath control that is rarely named. If you stop controlling, what will happen? Will you become unconscious? Will you lose clarity? Will you fall back into old patterns? This fear assumes that awareness depends on your supervision, that without effort, something essential will be lost. But awareness has been present during every mistake you have ever made. It was present when you were distracted, when you were reactive, when you were lost. You did not need to manage it then. It did not abandon you. It simply knew what was happening. Control tries to improve awareness. Relaxation reveals it. When effort softens, you may notice that experience continues perfectly well on its own. Thoughts arise, choices happen, words come out of your mouth, the body moves, and all of it is known without a manager standing over it. This does not mean passivity, it means responsiveness without a central controller. And as the grip of control loosens, something else begins to feel less necessary too. The idea that there must be a seeker directing the journey, deciding where awakening should go next and how fast it should arrive. At some point, something very quiet begins to change. Not as an insight you can repeat and not as a dramatic realization you can point to. It changes in the way gravity changes when you stop resisting it. The effort that once felt necessary starts to feel slightly misplaced. The question, "How do I awaken?" begins to sound different, almost like it's aimed in the wrong direction. This is the true shift. For a long time, seeking awakening feels natural. Of course you are seeking. You feel incomplete. You sense that something fundamental has been overlooked. You hear others speak about clarity, freedom, presence. So you move toward it. You read, listen, practice, observe yourself. And none of this is wrong. It is part of the movement. But slowly you may notice something unexpected. The more sincerely you look, the harder it becomes to locate the seeker. You can find thoughts about seeking, feelings of longing, images of a future version of yourself who is finally awake. But the one who is supposed to be doing the seeking never quite appears. It dissolves into sensations, impulses, questions, all of them observed, none of them observing. And this is unsettling, because seeking depends on direction. Seeking assumes distance. It assumes time. It assumes that awakening is ahead of you, and you are here, moving toward it. But when you look honestly at your experience, you only ever find this moment, not as a concept, but as a fact. The past appears as memory now. The future appears as imagination now. The seeker appears as a thought now. Everything appears now and disappears now. So what exactly is moving toward what? The phrase seeking awakening quietly assumes that awakening is an event waiting to happen to someone. That one day something will finally click and the seeker will arrive at a destination. But what if awakening is not an event at all? What if it is the gradual collapse of the one who thought they were traveling? This does not feel like progress. It feels more like disorientation. The mind wants to know where it stands. It wants to measure how far it has come. It wants reassurance that something is happening, but the true shift does not offer those comforts. It removes the reference points that made seeking feel purposeful in the first place. You may notice that the question, "Am I awake yet?" starts to lose meaning. Not because it has been answered, but because it no longer makes sense. Awake compared to what? Compared to yesterday? Compared to someone else? Compared to an imagined state that only exists as a thought? The moment you stop feeding that comparison, the question fades. This is often misunderstood as indifference or giving up. But it is neither. It is a subtle recognition that awareness does not need to be reached because it is already doing the reaching. It is already here, noticing the search itself. You are not seeking awakening in the way a person looks for a lost object. Awakening is what is noticing the movement of seeking. This does not feel dramatic. In fact, it can feel disappointingly simple. There is no arrival, no finish line, no clear moment you can claim as it. The shift shows up as a loss of urgency, a softening of effort, a sense that life does not need to be pushed into understanding itself. Thoughts still appear, confusion still happens, emotions still move through the body, but they are no longer interpreted as obstacles to awakening. They are just what is happening, fully included, fully known. And here is where language becomes tricky. It may sound like nothing is happening, but something profound has changed. The center has dropped out. There is no longer a strong sense of someone managing the process, evaluating each moment, deciding whether it is spiritual enough or conscious enough. Experience begins to unfold without commentary about what it should be. This is why the true shift often feels anticlimactic. The mind expects fireworks. What it encounters instead is ordinary life, minus the constant pressure to become something else. You still pay bills, you still get tired, you still react sometimes, but the weight of personal failure around these things begins to loosen. There is a growing sense that awakening is not something you do to life. It is life recognizing itself, quietly, without asking permission. And because it is not an achievement, it does not belong to you. You cannot hold it. You cannot stabilize it. You cannot use it as a new identity. The moment you try, seeking quietly returns, dressed in more refined language. So the shift is not something you claim. It is something you notice after the claiming impulse weakens. And when that happens, a strange reversal becomes visible. It feels less like you are moving toward truth, and more like truth has always been present, patiently noticing every attempt to move away from it. including the sincere, exhausting effort to finally wake up. Consciousness doesn't need you. It never did. It doesn't rely on your effort, your understanding, or your control. It doesn't wait for you to improve or become different. It simply is. Silent, present, unmoved by everything that passes through it. But you depend entirely on it. Every thought you've ever had needed it. Every memory, every emotion, every sense of being alive exists only because consciousness is already here, knowing it. Without it, there would be no confusion, no seeking, no clarity, and no you to ask these questions. You were never separate from it, even in the moments you felt most lost. When you stop trying to reach consciousness, something relaxes. Life doesn't disappear. It becomes simpler, more honest, less personal. What is real doesn't need to be forced. It reveals itself in the quiet space where effort ends. If you stayed until the end, write this sentence in the comments so I know you were here with me the whole way. I was never outside of what I was looking for. And if this resonated with you, watch one of the videos appearing on the screen now. If you want more content like this, that's where the next step is waiting.